The story of Adam and Eve, we all think we know it, right? But what if the fall wasn't just about one single bite of an apple? Well, according to this really fascinating analysis in Daniel NB Lamptey's book, The Lamb, the Cross, and the Water, it was actually a chain reaction of 4 very distinct errors. So today, let's break them down. Okay, before we dive into the mistakes, I want you to do something for me. Just for a second, try to put yourself in Adam's shoes. It's so easy for us to judge from our perspective, but can you imagine being the very first leader of all humanity? There's no instruction manual, no one to ask for advice. The pressure must have been absolutely immense.
Right, so with that massive pressure in mind, let's explore this chain of events that the author argues led to the fall. It's a tragic, but honestly a surprisingly insightful look at how these small slips can lead to a truly catastrophic failure. So here's the game plan. We'll kick things off by setting the stage with Adam's task. Then we're going to walk through each of these 4 key errors: backsliding, miscommunication, idolatry, and a lack of purpose. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with what we can learn from this. All right, let's get into it. Error number 1. It all kicks off with a really simple but super important question. How in the world did the serpent even get into the Garden of Eden in the first place? According to this analysis, it was no accident.
And this verse right here is actually central to the whole argument. See, the idea here is that temptation, it doesn't just pop up out of thin air. It has to find an opening, right? A loophole that we've kind of left unguarded, like a broken fence in a protective hedge.
So what exactly was Adam's broken hedge? Well, the source calls it this thing called a false balance. His number one job, his primary focus was supposed to be that intimate connection with God. But instead, his attention shifted. It drifted completely over to his wife, and he made her the center of his world.
And that is what the author here is calling backsliding. It's not some big, dramatic rebellion, It's more like a slow, gradual cooling of that fire for God. And that slow drift is what created the very first opening in the hedge. Okay, so that brings us right to the second error, and you'll see how it's a direct result of that first one. With Adam's focus now shifted, his next big failure was all about communication, or more specifically, miscommunication, in how he passed on God's command to Eve. Now get this, because this detail is really key. God's command about that tree, it was given to Adam before Eve was even on the scene. Think about that. The responsibility to pass that message on perfectly, with all its weight and importance, that was 100% on him. But he didn't do that. Instead of giving her clear understanding, the source argues he just gave her fear and confusion. And what does that do? It only made Eve more anxious, more curious about this mysterious tree. It left her totally vulnerable and looking for a second opinion. And that was an opening the serpent was more than happy to slither right into. And this leads us straight into the third error, which again is a direct consequence of the first 2, idolatry. But it might not be what you're thinking. So the source here has a super simple definition for idolatry. It's just prioritizing anything or anyone above God. That's it. And by that definition, well, both Adam and Eve were guilty. So let's break that down. Who idolized what? You can see Adam idolized his wife. He put her desires above God's direct command. And Eve? Well, fueled by all that fear and curiosity we just talked about, she ended up idolizing the forbidden tree itself. And here's the kicker. This act of worshiping created things, the woman, the tree, instead of the creator himself, this wasn't just a minor slip-up. According to the author, this was basically the formal invitation that let the serpent waltz right into the garden.
Okay, on to the final error. And honestly, this one might be the most surprising of the bunch. The author argues it all centers on Adam's failure to give his wife a name.
Yeah, you heard that right. And the analysis makes this really fascinating distinction. A surname. It tells you where you come from, right? Your origin. So when Adam called her woman, he was basically giving her a surname, defining her as taken from man. But a name, a first name, that reveals your identity, your purpose. And that he completely failed to provide. And just look at the timing here. It tells the whole story. He only names her Eve, which means mother of all living, defining her purpose after the fall. He gave her a purpose, but only when it was already too late. So without that clear, defined purpose, Eve was just adrift. She was confused.
The author argues that if Adam had just established her role as his helpmeet, his partner, she would have known exactly what to do. She would have known to turn to him, the one who got the command directly from God, the second that serpent started talking.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? What can we learn from this tragic breakdown? Because it really wasn't just one bad decision about a piece of fruit, was it? It was a total domino effect. You can see the whole tragic descent of authority right here. Each error just flowed right into the next, creating this cascade that completely flipped the divine structure on its head. It was supposed to go from God to Adam, but Adam, because he was distracted, basically passed the buck to his wife, and she, lost in all that confusion, effectively handed it all over to the serpent.
And this quote really sums up the whole lesson. It's so powerful. The point is, it's often not the sin we commit that opens the door for trouble, but what we should have done and just didn't. That inaction, failing to connect, failing to communicate, failing to lead, that can be just as dangerous, if not more so.
So, this whole analysis really leaves us with a pretty powerful question for our own lives, doesn't it? What are the hedges in our own lives that we're neglecting? What crucial things are we not paying attention to? And what might be slipping through the gaps because of it? Look, if this breakdown got you thinking and you want to dive deeper, the full argument is right there in the book. It's a seriously thought-provoking read, and I highly recommend checking it out. You can find it on Amazon.com.